Now let's take a look at the functions tab over here. So we get 3 of these functions, and they're all pretty much identical. So let's go ahead and set this up to modulate something in our sound. Using the basic sound here, we have wavetable loaded into engine 1. Maybe we can modulate the phase distortion. So I'll hit that plus button there, and I'll assign function 1 to modulate it. Alright, so already right off the bat, you notice that it looks and sounds like an LFO, like a ramped down LFO. Let's look at some of the controls here. There's a rate control. It's synced right now, but I can click here and we have all these same options just like in the LFO. Let's quickly head over to the LFO and look at that. Right, looks pretty much identical. Okay, now just like the LFO, this can be bipolar. So currently you can see the modulation is happening from this point up to a higher point. If I offset this dial somewhere in the middle and turn on bipolar, you notice that now it's bipolar. Alright, let's skip this for a second. Let's look at some of these other controls. Right now it's in loop mode, just like an LFO, but I can switch to this one-shot mode. And now when I play a note, the modulation just happens once, kind of like an envelope. If I switch to run, it seems like it's just like loop mode, but there is a subtle difference. Let me slow down the rate, switch it back to a half note. So you notice retriggering the notes doesn't retrigger this function, but if I switch to loop mode, it always restarts the function generator. So think of this as free running mode and think of this as synced to a specific gate source. And again, we're familiar with this. We have that same list over here. So right now it's using the monophonic keyboard input. Alright, this is very cool. So unlike the envelopes and LFOs, for the function generators, we actually have presets. So you have these existing presets, and of course you can save your own presets as well. And over here, we can transfer a preset or copy a preset to any of the other 2 function generators. Alright, we'll come back and check out presets later on. Let's check out the draw mode here. So yes, this is kind of behaving like an LFO, but what's cool is that you can customize the shape of this LFO. Now there are different ways to customize this, or different draw modes here. Let's start with the leftmost one. In this mode, you can click anywhere to create breakpoints and essentially draw your own custom LFO shape. You can curve these lines in different ways. Now you can do it directly on the graph here, or you can select a point, adjust the position and the level. Very cool. This other draw mode, think of this as stepped draw mode. So now we're getting these stepped positions. And in certain scenarios that could be helpful. In this mode, it's still kind of stepped, but you have this ramp up shape instead. And then lastly, we have this ramp down shape. And of course, you can mix and match and create your own custom pattern here. Now you notice magnetize is on. So let's say I'm in this mode. When I'm trying to move a particular breakpoint to a different position, it snaps to the grid line there that you see in the background. But if I turn off magnetize, you'll notice that it will no longer snap. So it might be helpful to have magnetize on. And then finally, we have the scale feature, which will scale the entire shape down to completely get rid of it, or even invert it. So that can be helpful. And interestingly, even that can be modulated. Alright, over here we have this randomization option. So let's say I like this pattern, but I want to randomize it a little bit. So I can click and drag here, and I can choose how much of randomization I want. So right now it's very subtle, and I can let go and just leave it at that. So a very subtle change here, but I can click and drag a lot. In fact, all the way to the maximum. Let go, and now we have a completely new random pattern. Pretty cool. Alright, so all of this was kind of treating this function generator like a very customizable LFO. But going back over here, instead of treating it like an LFO, we can also have this function run in envelope mode. Now it looks exactly the same. In fact, when I play a note, it doesn't even run through. Check out what happens when I go back to the envelope section and increase the release on this amp envelope. Let's make it nice and long. Now let's go back to the function section and play a note. Again, looks like nothing's happening, but check out what happens when I release a note. Wow, so it seems like this entire shape is only getting triggered during the release stage. And that's because this little breakpoint over here is the sustain point. You see that S there? Now it doesn't have to be here. I can select any breakpoint, just double click it, and set that as a sustain point. So now when I play a note, that is up to the sustain point, and as long as I'm sustaining a note, it'll stay here, and when I let go, it'll move on. So think of this as the most complex envelope that you could ever create. Now you can also activate loop and choose which breakpoints to loop. Right now it's looping from breakpoint number 1 to 18. And then when I let go, it goes on to the second half of the pattern here. So as you can see, if you feel like envelopes or LFOs are not as customizable as you want them to be, the function section will take that to the extreme and give you as much flexibility as possible. Let's quickly check out some of the presets. In fact, while this is active, let's introduce some wavefolding. And let's use the second function generator for this. And on the second function generator, let's check out some of the presets. There's Rhythmic 2. I'm going to tone down this modulation. So going back to function 1, let's reduce this amount so we can focus more on number 2. Let's try another pattern, step sequence 16. And look at that. You can also create very simple shapes like this. This is essentially a square wave LFO. So let's say you needed a fourth LFO. You could just use the function to create another LFO. Alright, so that is the function tab. In the next tutorial, we'll check out the random modulators.